Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building brands, businesses, and a career you love with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over. Welcome back to Unemployed and Afraid. I am so happy you're here to hear about the personal journeys of those creating brands and businesses, how it happened, why it happened, and all the scary bits along the way. Our episode today comes with a little language warning. Okay, random aside, do we still need to do language warnings? Because I just cannot help myself with the odd swear. Actually, a couple of weeks back, I went to TEDx in Hobart and they gave some people in the crowd a chance to do a 30-second TED Talk. And now I stuck my hand up, as if you followed me for a little while, you might know that speaking is high on the metaphorical vision board. And I'm still in my say yes to everything era, so I kind of had to do it. And they told the crowd they were going to do this just before lunch. So to start thinking about what you might say, if you can, blah, blah, blah. Now I went into full writer mode, crafting some beautiful connection that essentially promoted this podcast, talking about honesty and facing your fears, only to scrap that when it was eventually my time to go for it, realizing it would be awkward as hell if I just started promoting this podcast to the crowd. I mean, it absolutely would have bombed. I would have just made it so awkward. So anyway, I went up there and I think I said shit within the first 3 words, starting with, I'm absolutely shitting myself. I went on to say something along the lines of, when someone asks you how you are and you say good, how often are you being honest with that answer? Then on to something about cognitive dissonance. I don't know, I sort of blacked out for a second there. And then I closed with a reinforcement of how much I was shitting myself. I'm 99% certain I was the only person who swore, because later in the day, there was a full-on language warning for a short film. And I was like, well, fuck, good one, Kim. Anyway, good times. All that chat from a language warning for this pod, which is an absolute ripper chat, I might say. We are hearing from Laura about her experience creating Go Kindly, which is an epic business by an even more epic human. We touch on something a little different for us, talking about her experience growing up in a fundamentalist community, as Laura describes it, essentially a cult. She opens up in a way that is so generous to others who may have a history or a present with this challenge, how that experience and her experience in a corporate environment that left much to be desired has formed her into the strong, powerful, grounded, and kind person she is today. We also talk about why considering your social impact in any business is simply a must-do, a seriously no-brainer. Laura leaves you feeling like everything is possible, like your voice and your work matters, and that is because it does. I enjoyed this chat so much. She'll make you feel like you can sit a bit taller and truly own who you are in this world. And maybe I'm just going to have to own the fact that I'm a little bit sweary. Here is my chat with the lovely Laura. I'm here with Laura McConnell-Conti, co-founder of #GoKindly, a high-quality bedding basics brand, B Corp, and social enterprise, making the world kinder by donating 50% of profits to women in need. Their product range includes pillows, quilts, and mattresses, beautiful basics, and they operate in a kindness circle. And what that means is that at each touch point, they aim to be kind and tread lightly. They support women, pay fair wages, use no single-use plastic packaging, and manufacture locally. Laura is also a CA, CPA, AAICD. Can't believe I just got through that without
a lot of acronyms there.
A board member at Wellsprings for Women, and an emerging author and blogger, writing regularly on the lives of women and children from fundamentalist sects and the difficulties faced leaving high control communities and religions. And she's a passionate feminist with intersecting identities, all of which is a subtle pre-promote to the amazing story Laura will share with us today. Featured in Smart Company, Women's Agenda, Urban List, and more, Laura and Go Kindly are passionate about sustainable capitalism, profit for purpose, and social enterprise models, believing that brands should exist to make the world better. Amen. I can't wait a minute longer to hear your story, Laura. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. Thank you for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure. I was excited to get into that bio. And as I said to you before we recorded, I was like, I might need a drink because this is a long one. This is impressive. But before we get into all of that, I would love to know how your partner, David, would describe you.
Gregarious, outgoing, a button pusher. I'm the kind of person that sees a problem and just keeps pushing at it to see what happens. He is an introvert and I am an extrovert. And so I become more of an extrovert to him and he becomes more of an introvert to me. So we're quite opposite. He would see me as passionate and loud and maybe a little bit interfering.
A button pusher. I think that's a great one. We were chatting a little bit before about bios. And I think maybe button pusher could just be, or you leave it. Just it's what I do. I love it. Before Go Kindly, who were you?
I think I had a lot of dreams and a lot of aspirations to be very ordinary and to be as mainstream as possible and to fit in and maybe to push a few buttons, but to do it softly and gently and nicely. Go Kindly changed all of that, or my trajectory towards Go Kindly changed all of that. But I really just wanted to be ordinary. I really did, Kim. I wanted to be an accountant from the suburbs. I wanted to drive a nice Mercedes and I wanted to just have a very ordinary, very normal life. And it was never going to happen because my background was never going to line up and allow that to happen. But I did try very, very hard to be all of those acronyms, to be a CA and to be a CPA and to be an AAICD and to do all the things they told you to do when I came out of university. It didn't line up that way and I'm grateful for that now, but it's been a very long journey to get to this point.
Tell me a little bit about your background and about your youthful journey, how you grew up.
I grew up in far western New South Wales in a very, very large family and a very large community of fundamentalist Christians, essentially as a cult, right? Like I grew up in a cult, essentially. I made a decision to leave when I was 19, which resulted in me really being excommunicated and all of the trauma and all of the stress that comes with it. But I've always been a very curious, very outgoing, very active person. And I always wanted a different life and a better life from the moment I could remember. As much as I loved my family and I loved my community, I never really belonged there. I never fitted in. It's a certain type of person that thrives in those environments, and that was not me. Too many buttons were being pushed for that to work. And, I was always a flamboyant person, and I don't know how much you know about fundamentalist Christians, but that's not really something we allow in women, and particularly girls with brains and girls with ideas and girls who ask questions are not very welcome. I just didn't fit, and as much as I would have wanted to and I would have wanted to stay with my family, it just didn't work. I put myself through university. I got a double degree. I studied a lot of things. I studied Chinese language. I have a major in Mandarin. I have a major in feminism. I have a major in accounting and finance. I wanted to learn and I was very curious and I wanted to be better. I wanted to work. I wanted all things that were not available to me in my community or in my family. It was a very difficult journey because I was alone. I didn't have anybody, but I was very positive and very determined. Essentially, I became an accountant. Better or for worse, and probably now in hindsight for worse. But anyway, I just always was a quirky kid. I was always a funny kid. I was always outgoing, but I never belonged. I didn't belong in that place. And and that's why I'm incredibly proud of where I am now, because I belong where I am now. It is me, and I'm very proud of that.
Take me through your corporate career a little bit. How did the trajectory of study into career, out of career, play out for you?
As I mentioned, I had a couple of different degrees and I studied really out of interest and out of curiosity and because I wanted to meet people and because I was interested in cultures and people and places. But I was also always very logical, and I grew up around very strong men who often were very good businessmen, and I believed from a very young age that I was equally as competent at business as them. And I was. It's just I didn't have a penis, which was a bit of a downer, really. And, I knew that I was as good as my male cousin because I can haggle and I'm a negotiator and I'm tough. And I knew pretty young that I had skills to be a business person, which is why I studied commerce, because it came naturally to me. But I knew it also wasn't enough for me just to be that, which is why I studied things like humanities and languages. I got to, the last year or so of my degree and realised, well, I can't just go out into the world now without a job. I need to have a career because I need to be able to work. I need to be able to support myself. And I had always worked. I've worked since I was 13 or 14, which is how I really got out, is by being able to support myself. So I really just went into a careers thing at university and said, how do I get a job? They gave me the list of people who were hiring and said, these accounting firms will come around and you go in and you have interviews with them and see if you can get a job. So I did. And I present as a nice, well-spoken, polite white person. I managed to get myself a job in a reasonably prestigious consulting firm, maybe one of the largest at the time. It didn't go well for me. It was a very difficult time and it was very hard. I was sold a dream that we needed women in these roles. And it was really sad that they had been unable to get women to stay in these roles and that they really needed us. There would be promotions for us and that we'd be well paid. I didn't for a lot of years realize how bad it was. It's only now in my 40s I realized how much sexual harassment there was, how much racism, how much classism there was. But I was surviving and trying to build a career. Certainly in my later 20s, rolling in money. I mean, you got well paid, right? Got to travel overseas, got jobs overseas and got reasonably well paid. It wasn't a great experience, not around people who were nurturing, people who were generous with their time, generous with understanding somebody who might be from a background like mine. And I never talked about where I came from. I never, ever felt safe to talk about where I came from, to talk about my family, to talk about the complexities of my background. It was not a nurturing career. All I got out of it was money. And my husband, I should say. I did meet my husband.
That's a bonus.
As much as I can be negative about, but there were things I'm grateful for. But it certainly did not lead me to a place where I felt that I was valued, where I felt that my skills were fairly remunerated compared to my male colleagues. It led to a fair bit of sexual harassment, a fair bit of discrimination, and re-traumatization of things that I'd already been through as a child. So to leave it has been a very long journey.
I think it's an experience that many people have had in that environment and perhaps haven't realized it until after, and allowing the experience to integrate in some way and have a little bit of space from it to be able to look back and go, oh, that's what that was.
Yeah, that's what that was by the photocopier. Oh, that's what that was in the filing room. Oh, that's a bit odd that all of those men got promoted 2-3 times ahead of me. Really is a bit odd that they told me that my personality was abrasive. All of those things, like one-offs, and then on one hand, they were telling us how much they needed women and how it was really hard to retain women. And you're like, oh, fucking, I wonder why. I don't know. Might want to look at all these experiences.
I find it hard not to laugh and choke with being told we're abrasive. I think the words and the implications behind the words that are often used under the guise of feedback and growth opportunities, in terms of this is an area you could work on, which could result in further advancement into this career. And it's those words, abrasive, passionate, a little too passionate, a little too emotional, a little much. That one really kills me.
I remember once raising with somebody because an older man got promoted ahead of me who was completely incompetent. And there was a reason why he was older, and he was sort of 55 and I was around about 28, got promoted ahead of me because it was his turn. And I had a conversation with the person who was my manager at the time about why and how. And he said, your trouble is you just want to be respected.
Oh, how weird.
I'm like, that's an issue here.
What eventually pushed you out the door?
Around about 40, I had a baby. And I'd never particularly been interested in having children. I was a fundamentalist girl who grew up. I was an eldest child and I had many, many cousins. And I had a lot of responsibility growing up looking after children. And I really felt that I didn't really need that responsibility again in my life. I'd done it a fair few times looking after kids. And I never felt that I really was interested in it. But I did have a little boy when I was almost 40. And that experience just changed completely my experience of the workforce. I genuinely believed to that point that the women who didn't make it and couldn't make it were just not trying hard enough, and they weren't tolerating enough, and that they weren't putting enough back on their partners in order for them to keep performing. And all of a sudden I realized, no, the way that you are treated when you say you're pregnant changes in an instant. The way that you are treated when you return. I never took maternity leave. I had 6 weeks off because my son was in ICU because he was born early. And I still worked from hospital with my son. I'm actually not bitter about that. It never bothered me. What I'm bitter about is that I was sold a lie that if I kept going and that if I didn't have needs and that if I didn't put those needs first, things would be okay. And they weren't. From the moment I announced that I was pregnant, things were not okay with my CEO, with the person I supported. And it just became an attrition, really, a way for him to constantly undermine, to constantly find ways to push me out of the organisation, to underpay me, to take work off me, to not give me bonuses, to hold meetings at 6 o'clock at night when I clearly didn't have childcare, and then cancel them without telling me. Just like constant, like a war of attrition to get rid of me. For no reason except that I dared to have a baby. And I wasn't even at home with that baby. I hadn't had maternity leave. I worked ridiculous hours. There's just no need for it, except that I had dared to do it, and that me returning to work just didn't align with his values, and the way I was doing it just didn't align with his values. And I just realized all the things I believed about myself and about why women weren't, especially women from backgrounds of minorities, whether that's race or gender or sexuality or whatever, weren't making it. I just stopped believing that those things were real. And I thought, I no longer believe in this model anymore. It's broken. The way we're doing capitalism is broken. You don't need another Range Rover. You don't need another Porsche. You're just pushing me out and you're behaving that way for your own ego and your own values, which don't align to mine. So it just changed a whole lot of things for me seeing that play out.
How did the business idea start to seed for you?
Well, as I said, I grew up around men who were entrepreneurial and I always knew I had it. I just didn't know how to translate it. I didn't have any capital backing to do anything with it. If someone had come along and given me this pen and said, here's a business, go sell pens and make it work, I could have always done it. But of course, that's not what happens, especially not when you're from a background where there's no money and no support, no one there to lift you up. I always knew I could do it. I supported a lot of very entrepreneurial people over my career. And I watched them and I did honestly feel I'm as good as you. I really did. I know that sounds really cocky, but I did. I always thought there's nothing special about you. You've just been lifted up along the way by various things, whether that is capital, whether that is your wife's family, whether that is, I don't know, your mates have helped you get in here. You got a job at one here because someone hired you who knew you, and then you got promoted because someone else knew you, and then you got a mentor. I just could see every way along the way that I was no different. It's just that I was a woman and I was a woman who didn't have the network and didn't have the money. And I knew that. I knew I had the skills. I just didn't know how to translate it into anything. And my husband says it's a friction point. I didn't have a friction point until I had my child that made me go, oh, this is really not working enough for me to walk away from that money. Having that child and watching the way I was treated was my friction point to be like, nah, I'm out. This ain't worth 300 grand a year. I'm out. I needed that friction point to push me because I did always believe I could do it.
I think you raised a couple of really interesting points there in terms of just knowing somewhere in your psyche, somewhere in your gut, somewhere in your heart that you have it in you to do your own thing and you have it in you to succeed as an entrepreneur. And that is just enough. And I think we really need to just ram it home for anyone who has that feeling. That feeling is enough to follow the thread. You can figure the rest out later, and you just have to follow that instinct that you are meant to do something. I can't remember how many years, maybe 3 years into the journey now. And, I'm only just now starting to find my feet in the thing and start to turn over a rock and go, there's a skill I need to develop. Okay, let's do that. Let's add that to the pile. Let's move things around. It's just that feeling is enough sometimes. And I think that's really, really important. Your husband has just articulated something really interesting there, friction point, the thing you have to wait for. I think sometimes we, as entrepreneurs or as business owners, aspiring business owners, think that the friction point needs to be major, maybe, and it absolutely can be, and that's a perfect experience if that's the individual's experience, a health issue, a shocking change, a trauma, a something. In your instance, that pain, that frustration can be little too. Any kind of little friction, you're just like, oh, this doesn't feel, this is enough. This is something that's going to push me to make a move. So I just wanted to really stop down on those 2 points because I think they're really powerful.
But also they don't have to be big. Lots of people come to me and say, you've got this big thing. And, it doesn't seem that big to me, but, it wasn't big. It was little. And you don't have to throw your whole baby out to get to it. It's okay to start something little. It doesn't have to be this big thing to begin with. Sure, it is now, but it wasn't 4 years ago. It was a baby. And I think there's also this tendency to think it's all or nothing, which it's not. You've still got to pay your bills and you've still got to cook your meals and look after your kids and do your housework. It doesn't have to encompass everything. It can start little. It doesn't have to be this big thing.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that. And you've segued me beautifully. Where did you get started with starting to make it something? Talk me through the concept of betting, where that came from, just how you got started.
My starting is a little bit unusual, but then so am I. So I think we just run with that.
Love it.
Christmas time 2018, I had a 6-month-old baby. And I just was at loggerheads with the CEO. I wanted to work with him and I loved the brand and I loved so many things about it, but he was just not being a good person. And, I was working really hard to try and fix things because I wanted it to. And it was between Christmas and New Year and we were in Apollo Bay on holidays. I just said to my husband, I don't think I can keep doing this anymore. I really don't. And I logged into LinkedIn, which you should never do when you're on holidays anyway, but I did. And I saw that somebody I'd been to university with had been promoted into a reasonably senior role in a similar sized organisation. And I know he was no better than me, the same degree from the same university, the same background. If anything, I've got a humanities degree that he doesn't have. I understand people, he does not. And I just looked at it and went, I don't understand why I'm at loggerheads with this CEO and I can't make it work. And yet here he is somehow just navigating a ladder upwards. And I just turned to my husband and I said, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I can keep fighting, or I can just accept that this system is not built for somebody like me and I can walk away and I can build something better. I'm going to walk away and I'm going to build something better. And literally it came from that, this idea that I could build something better where I didn't have to fight, where I didn't have to try and fit myself into a system and a ladder that never wanted me. From the moment I walked into that degree, it wasn't set for me. And for me, it was like, okay, so what does that look like? What does better look like? What does different look like? What does outside that look like? I knew that I wanted to support causes that I knew could drive change, things that I cared about. I knew that I could sell things. I knew that I could negotiate. I knew that I could create. I knew I had all these skills. I just didn't have a product and I didn't have a brand, right? And so I just really wrote down all the things that I wanted in this big bubble of things, about supporting certain kinds of people, being women experiencing homelessness, that I knew I could sell certain things. I knew I could create certain things. I just wrote it all down. And it really just started from there going, all right, well, what could it be? How could you create it? And I didn't have a product. I didn't have a name. Product came to me at least 2 months in. I had an operating model before I had a product. I had an operating model of like, it's going to be a social enterprise. It's going to employ people from backgrounds that are having trouble getting into the workforce and empower them and give them skills to move on. It's going to be Australian made. It's going to be an e-commerce operation because I want it to be flexible enough to be able to employ people who can't work ordinary hours. It's going to be well made. I just went through this checklist of all these things I wanted, and then eventually the products have fallen into place from there.
That's amazing. And I love that. And I think that's very important to realize that so often the product comes later. It's not necessarily wake up and go, do you know what? I'm really passionate about great bedding. Yeah. Which I am really passionate about a great pillow. Don't get me wrong. My bed is my happy place.
Yeah, me too. It didn't start there. It started with me just wanting to do things differently and trying to work out, well, what does that look like?
So how did the bedding thing come into it? Was there a trigger, and did it come to you in a dream? It feels almost like too picture perfect that your bedding business came to you in a dream.
No, not really. I mean, I literally had checklists. I had Excel spreadsheets. I mean, I am an accountant at heart. I had Excel spreadsheets of products, how much they weighed, where they were made, how big they were, the complexities involved in shipping, whatever. I knew it had to be light. I knew it had to be simple, made in Australia. And I went through everything: tea towels, socks, toilet paper. Who gives a crap's done that? Man Threads has done socks. I just sort of went through the list of things, and I literally was just riding down the freeway one day on my motorbike, and I went, pillows. No, those are light. You can post those very easily. And then it just, came from there.
How did you feel when your first sample arrived?
Terrified. I still think back on my first order, which was 6 pillows. And I thought, how on earth am I going to sell 6 pillows? And then I sold those 6 very quickly. And then I ordered 100 and somehow stuffed them into this room behind me, actually, to the ceiling. And it's a terrace.
Please tell me that at some stage you did like a jump into the middle of them. Surely that happened.
I think they fell on us more times than we jumped on them, to be honest. Yeah, we would open the door and they would all just fall on top of us out of the room.
It's a great picture.
Yeah, and I just sort of was like, okay, well, now I've got to sell 100 and now I've got to sell 1,000.
So talk me through the brand name and the development of that. It is #GoKindly. So, we have that there. And then, of course, we can reference Go Kindly. But tell me in the name, talk me through that process, how it came about.
Again, when I was writing down all those ideas, I wrote about the ways I wanted to feel about my brand and about ways I wanted my customers to feel about my brand. And again, no product at this point. And I literally wrote them all down on an A3 piece of paper, which was actually from the Apollo Bay Tourist Information Centre. It was their map. I went and got about 25 pieces of their map and just stuck it all over the walls at this house that we were staying at in Apollo Bay. Still got them somewhere, like the Apollo Bay city, town map is on the back of it. It was all the words I wanted to feel and I wanted other people to feel about my brand. And my husband literally went through and just started putting words together and going, oh yeah, they sound good together, or they represent something good together. And eventually it became Go Kindly. And I honestly don't know how the hashtag came about, except that my husband wrote it down and said it looks better with hashtag in front of it than it does just 2 words. And so that's how it came to be, is he created it. It feels soft and it feels gentle and it feels encouraging, and it fits with bedding really nicely.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I really like it. I want to go back to your purpose and being a social enterprise. And I'd like to know a little bit about the process and how that worked in terms of building that into your company, and more specifically, the process of becoming a B Corp.
Yeah, well, from the moment it was conceived, Go Kindly always donated 50% of its proceeds. And that was because I didn't see the point. I didn't see the point if it wasn't there for a purpose. If it's not there to help change a social issue, I don't understand why businesses and brands exist. Why do they exist other than to do good? And good is a pretty loose subject. I mean, good for who? And for me, I mean, good is for other people and good is for solving and contributing towards solving social issues. So that for me was almost the easiest part. Both my partner and I come from an accounting background. So for us, the setting up of the social enterprise concept was fairly easy. It was like, we've always donated anyway. We knew the causes. We knew the things we wanted to support. That part was relatively easy. The harder part really has been the B Corp in a good way, because in lots of ways it reaffirmed for me how many things were built into our business model and built into our operating style and built into our personalities. We didn't really have to adjust a lot to get B Corp certification and to get a decent score on a B Corp certification. So, there's a scale and, you can pass, I think it's 80%. And by doing very little, we passed. We did not really have to implement anything except some policies that were already in action. They just weren't written down for our staff. They just needed to be formalized. We already delivered enough before the certification to be certified. And it's a really good baseline and a really good reminder about how if you build something from the ground up, you can build this stuff into its DNA. You can build caring for the environment, giving back, paying your employees fairly, reducing the miles that things travel, and recyclability in from the beginning. And this is not a big deal. Like it's possible right from the start. Obviously, we want to get better. We're not perfect and there's loads of places we can improve. But to have that baseline and to have that baseline really comfortably and easily, I'm very proud of that. Very proud of that.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I think sometimes being a B Corp, becoming a B Corp, being recognised as one gets put up in lights and a pedestal as something perhaps unachievable or only achievable for businesses who have been in operation for a really long time, doing insane amounts of turnovers. But that's just because they're the biggest companies who've talked about being a B Corp and have that kind of voice to be able to say, hey, we are one. And so it becomes this, pedestal thing, but everyone can achieve this and should aspire to achieve this. It shouldn't be on the bottom of the list.
No, at a grassroots level, you should care about things like how much water you're using and what your electricity consumption is and whether or not you're paying your employees fairly. Honestly, for me, it's like, how is it not just normal company practice, truth be told? Why does it need to be a B Corp to do the bare minimum for humanity? Obviously, we want to be better. There's a whole lot of ways we would like to recycle differently and, use things differently. But like a baseline, that's like baseline ethics. Everyone should care about that.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you anymore. And I think whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, our capitalist culture and our capitalist society is catching up because the broad population want this from the brands that they engage with. And those brands that present this are going to receive a higher commercial return for doing this work. And that's in hard Kantar stats. That's what people want. It's out there. So now that there's a commercial return attached to it, hopefully we see more people doing it. But yes, you're right. Perhaps if there was more people in the first instance, like your good self, thinking about this, we wouldn't have to have waited for that to come out, for society to demand.
Yeah. And I go back to trust as well. I think for me, that trust matters, and put my customer believing that we have good ethics and that we have good values is important to me. And B Corp is one way to demonstrate that. I think, the certification process is very good in demonstrating. I do think it's very valuable in social proof because loads of people say they do things they don't do. And I think it's a really good certification process. But I think everyone should be thinking, what is my purpose? Why do we exist? Is it just for money? Because if it's just for money, fine, be honest about that. But I don't think it's going to serve you into the next century, I'm afraid to tell you.
Amen. Speaking of money, in this startup period, as you were growing, we go from 6 pillows to 100 to 1,000 to 6,000. How were you supporting yourself financially through this time?
Not very well. No. I mean, back to my comment earlier about people who think you have to start big. I still do work as a consultant, right? I still have to consult on the side to supplement our income. I choose to do it now, not because I have to. I choose to do it now because it means I can reinvest and not work in it. I can put my salary back into the business, and it means I can remain bootstrapped rather than need to take external investment at this point. My partner always worked. He works full-time in it now. But for us, being bootstrapped has also been, and that independence has also been very important, because it means we can control the ethics and we can control the supply chain and we can control the kinds of people we hire and the kinds of decisions we make. And that's very important to us. It does mean we have to grow slower, and the growth is much more incremental and self-invested. But I don't think there's any shame in being honest about that. The fact that, sometimes I do have to work 2 days a week as a consultant. And to be honest, I kind of like it. I like that I get to step outside my own bubble and interact with people as an average employee and be reminded again about hierarchy and about ethics and about management styles and about reality because you can get into your own bubble when you're the one who's the CEO. It's good for you to put down a peg or two and just be an average person on the floor.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is so important. There seems to be this glorification of founders and, startups and scale ups that it's all in, it's hardcore, it's hustle, it's, 100% commitment, but it is all those things. And then there's the reality of working, perhaps for others or balancing and doing those things. And I agree with you. It gives you something different. It gives you a different perspective. And it also makes everything not be everything. You feel like you've got choice, and that allows space in your mind. And I think it's just really important to remind people of that. It is never a step back to work or engage with somebody else that's not your business when you're running a business. It is only a step forward.
It's okay also to do it for a while and then stop and then do it again. That doesn't make you a failure, right? It really doesn't. It makes you understand risk management. I mean, we're heading into a recession right now, right? I don't want to be stressed. I want to always know I've got 2 days a week of consulting work that will always pay my mortgage, and I don't need to be stressed about what the economy does. I think also we need to talk about people's mental health and about risk management and about caring for yourself and caring for your family, and not thinking that this hustle culture means you have to throw everything in and you're a failure if you can't make it work. It doesn't have to be that way.
I couldn't agree anymore. The marketplace, a little bit of a switch in topic for you. There's a pretty crowded marketplace, I would say, in your category. There's some pretty deep marketing pockets in there as well. In particular, those people perhaps don't have the same focus that you do in terms of social enterprise. But either way, those pockets are deep. How do you get yourself heard?
It's really interesting because there was a lot of things when we started out that the big names didn't have. Didn't have compostable mailer bags. They had a lot of plastic. They were overpackaged. On the surface, we're doing quite well at marketing, but also I think they were pretty lazy, to be honest. I actually think when you're a grassroots hustler, you work out pretty quickly the things they're good at and you just avoid that. And you just go for the things like SEO and SEM. We punch way above our weight for a small brand. Things like content in Google that gets us ranking high. We're able to maintain that and to move it daily and to change blogs and to change traffic pages easily and quickly to meet customer demand for search terms. But there's a nimbleness that they don't have, right? They've got big, deep pockets to create ads and to create schmick campaigns, but there's also a lack of nimbleness. And there's also a lack of, they are getting better, to be fair, at things like recycling programs, plastic packaging, compostable bags. That stuff, they are very slow to adapt. They are getting there, which the customer wanted. The customer wanted this 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So we were able to be ahead of that in lots of ways because of our nimbleness and because of our size. And I think the purpose piece, our customer is a very certain type of person who cares about very certain kinds of things. And there will always be a place for the big brands and their deep pockets. But there's an authenticity that resonates with our audience, and they are very loyal, and that plays to us. That plays to our strengths.
Yeah, I love that. The nimbleness is it's such an important point that gets missed. If you spend so much time looking at the competition and thinking about what you don't have, you might miss what you actually do have in terms of opportunity and a different kind of hustle. Where do you want to see your business grow to?
It's a constant point of push and pull with my partner and I, because he wants big, he's that masculine energy, he wants bigger, faster, whatever. And I'm like, I don't want big people problems, right? I want little people problems. Little people problems made a little bit bigger. So for me, it's I love to see a $10 million business that can deliver real funding change for our charity partners in terms of housing support and in terms of emergency housing. For me, the leaving of family violence, being able to provide long-term options to our funding partners to address people unable to leave family violence because of housing issues, children not being able to be raised in safe environments. I would love to be able to manufacture more products here in Australia, faster here in Australia, and be faster to market with some products. Because when you manufacture in Australia, there's this maybe a myth that it's faster to market, but often it's not, because we've lost a lot of manufacturing capacity in Australia. And so I would really like to be part of a resurgence in some kinds of that manufacturing capability here. And that is happening as a result of COVID, to be fair, to get some more products to market faster by having more manufacturing capacity here. And then obviously there's the employment of people from backgrounds who are finding it hard to get back into employment. That's for me is also ridiculously rewarding. So yeah, while my husband's going for $1 billion next month, I'm like, you know what, I'd be okay with 5 to 10 million in 5 years. And so long as there's solid profit and there's solid growth and it's ethical and it's from a place that's supporting others and making the world better, I'm fine with that.
It's brilliant. Talk to me a little about the role writing has in your life right now and where you want that to go.
Writing is both rewarding and difficult. It's rewarding for me because it puts into concrete terms the things that I have done and have always done and will continue to do in a concrete, real way that is tangible evidence that my experiences existed, that what happened to me is real and it's still happening to other people leaving fundamentalist groups and leaving cultish groups. It's also very difficult because it is very traumatizing and it does bring me into contact with a lot of sadness, and it brings me into contact with a lot of people who have suffered great harm and trauma. But it's also very rewarding because it means that I get to be earlier on in conversations than I was in realizing what had happened and to help steer young people in a different path to what happened to me. It's important to me that we talk about these high control groups, that we talk about coercive control, because essentially that's what these groups are. They're massive coercive controlling despots who shun people and who trap people in there out of fear and then harm people when they leave by not talking to them again and not acknowledging their existence, or by denying abuse, by denying them financial support, by denying them access to family and employment and whatnot. And obviously it underpins my whole existence. You know, that experience shaped my life. And it is something I can dabble in and out of, thankfully, because it's not my primary purpose in life. But it is very important to my why, and it drives me, and it underpins my ethics, and it underpins my decision-making every day, even when I'm not writing and even when I'm not pitching stories and trying to get airtime for the issue. It underpins everything that I am. You know, it underpins my relationships, or lack thereof. It underpins my education. It underpins my history. And it's important to me. It does come with this tension of enjoyment versus reward.
What triggered you in the first instance to start the process of putting it out there?
I never realized for years that what I was doing was work. And it wasn't until I got into board roles and I started, particularly at Wellsprings for Women, realizing what the clinical practice of supporting people leaving family violence and leaving abusive families, and that, oh my God, what I've been doing is work. I didn't realize this is what family violence practitioners did. What I have been doing all these years, supporting people just because I felt like it was the right thing to do and I didn't want people to go through it themselves. Oh, that's work? Like, it never occurred to me. It was just like it came from a place of genuine care for people. And because that's the family I was raised in as well, I was raised in a family that, despite the shit, religious stuff, genuinely cared for other people. I came from a working class farming family who knew what it was like to go without and would never, ever let a hitchhiker go on the freeway or on the highway, would never let anybody go hungry. I acted from that place. I didn't realize that stuff is work. And it was that realization that made me go, oh my God, I've been carrying this all these years and not spoken about it and not asked for help with it. And then somebody who I had conversations with in my community when I was much younger was killed by her husband. It was just the catalyst for me. I just thought, I have heard and seen some horrendous things out of this group and similar groups. I won't stay quiet anymore. I won't hide this anymore. And not working inside a corporate and not working inside an environment where it was unsafe for me to talk about it meant I could talk about it finally. And those two things happened fairly close together, this person dying or being killed and me leaving my career. And I just thought, I've got no reason not to speak anymore. I've got no reason to stay quiet anymore. This is work. What I do is work. The support I've given people over the years, that is work. As much as I care for them and I genuinely want the best for them, it's work. I won't stay quiet anymore about the sexual abuse, the financial abuse, the coercive control, and about the shunning that happens. I've got no reason to. I've got no fear anymore. I've seen what they do and they can't hurt me any more than they have. I think there was also this fear in me that if I spoke out publicly, if I wrote, if I blogged, if I told my story, they would hurt me more, because there is a lot of backlash at people who speak out about these groups. They have very deep pockets, but they can't hurt me anymore. I've got the power now, not them.
Thank you for sharing that in such an open way. Will definitely help, I think, others in the same situation. How have you grown as a person through this process of leaving your career, this process of developing Go Kindly, this process of finding your voice through your words? What's changed for you as a person?
I don't know. I think I'm just more authentic, tolerate less bullshit. I call it now, which means that my network is smaller because That's not always something people are willing to hear. It's more authentic. I'm much more authentic. But also, I think I'm a better person. I can apologize when I get it wrong. I can listen. I'm not so invested in having to be right. Maybe that's just age, who knows. But I think it genuinely, like, it kind of has made me a kinder person. It's brought me back into contact with the things that I grew up around, this sense of caring for others, this sense that other people have different stories and different journeys, and they are equally as valid, and that the corporate story is not the only story and the money story is not the only story. And that's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. As you've described, that sense of supporting each other, lifting each other up is just at the core of everything you do, as you've described, and it's the core of what we all should do. So on that sentiment, how can the listener and I support you on your journey now and into the future?
Well, next time you need bedding, head to gokindly.com.au. And also, if you have product ideas, I think that's also very powerful. If you see a product and you're like, they could do that, that aligns to their brand. We love hearing from people, because genuinely that's where our product range has been developed over the years is, I like this pillow, but I'd like it to be softer. I want a super king quilt. Like, we are very product centric and very customer centric. So not only heading to gokindly.com.au when you need products, but also if you've got ideas, send them through.
Yes, I have one for you. Throw rugs. I feel like they're everywhere, and they're often so synthetic and made overseas, and just they get thrown away. They get ruined after you wash them. I mean, I'd be in the market for that.
Throw rugs. I'm writing it down. Okay.
I love it. Laura, it has been just such a joy for me to spend this time with you today and hear your story. I'm so grateful that you took the time to tell me all about it, to be so open and share your learnings. I've learned so much from you today, and I know the listener will too. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me and for putting up with my storytelling.
You said to me before we hit record that you would speak very fast. I think you spoke perfectly fast. I think I was right there with you. It was my pleasure to have you. One quick thing, if you're hearing this, you've listened all the way through. Hopefully that means you really like this podcast, because it's pretty generous to give up 40 odd minutes of your time for it. If that is the case, please leave the show a star rating and a review. It helps me reach so many more people who might also listen all the way through and get some benefit and some support out of it. Not to mention, it puts a real spring in my step to read them. Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review, and of course, join the community on Instagram and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid. See you there.